this is an issue that we've been talking about on this program for, I would say, most all of the 19 years I have been doing this show. And that is, how do we most effectively produce progressive change in the United States? And the position that I have taken largely from the beginning is that while, yes, it's important to call out corporate Democrats, it's important to call out Democrats who have betrayed us. You've heard no shortage of my identifying the very specific corruption, for example, of Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin on this program. I am not afraid to call out corporate Democrats. I'm actively campaigning against a corporate Democrat in my own state, Kurt Schrader, the guy who keeps trying to stop Medicare from negotiating drug prices. He's the heir to I think it's the Pfizer, for one of the big pharmaceutical fortunes. He's a Democrat here in Oregon. 4 local Democratic parties, county Democratic parties that all are on or border his district, have now come out and endorsed his opponent, Jamie McLeod Skinner, who has been a guest on this program. So it's not like I'm afraid to do that or reluctant to do it, but my point is that often we use that critique or criticism of corporate Dems as sort of the political equivalent of masturbation. It feels good, but it doesn't produce any consequential results. Instead, we need to get inside the Democratic Party, take it over, and make that change happen. And there's a couple of issues here, and that's why I said I'm going to spend some time with this. Back in the day, I used to have this caller, Jeff from Denver, who would call in all the time, and I wrote about him in my book Screwed back in 2000, whatever it was, 2004, I think that book was published. And he would call and complain about what the corporate Democrats in Colorado were doing. And one day I said, well, why don't you show up at the Democratic Party and do something? And he did. And he became a precinct committee person, as I recall, and ended up actually helping write the Democratic Party platform. Activism works. It actually does work, but it requires more than just words. I mean, nowadays I get callers all the time saying, yeah, I became a precinct committee person. And, it's an entirely possible thing to do. You can do it. We can all do it. There is, by the way, Sean and Nate, I'm not sure which of you wants to do this, but there is a 2-minute YouTube in my article today on HartmannReport.com that I would like to play the audio from, or at least some of the audio from, in the second block of this half hour. If you and I wanted to take over NBC, for example, to promote progressive change, it could take billions of dollars to pull that off. The Democratic Party, on the other hand, at least in most areas, and I realize that there's a lot of institutional inertia to overcome, and you've got some really entrenched people, but nonetheless, it's a nonprofit organization that has basically a sign hanging out saying, come on in. And a lot of progressives are doing that. I mean, look at the impact of just Bernie Sanders stepping into the Democratic Party. Bernie created the Congressional Progressive Caucus. He was the co-founder of it. And I remember back in the day, back in 2000, I think it was 2005. It was way back when I was doing this program, and Bernie was on the show every Friday, Brunch with Bernie. He did that for 11 years. And I had been invited to do a fundraiser for the Congressional Progressive Caucus. And my recollection is it was down in the Southwest, might have been Arizona or New Mexico. And Raul Grijalva was the guy who was leading the caucus at that time. And I went down there to do this fundraiser, and there was maybe a little fewer than 100 activists who showed up, which was pretty good. But back then, there were only a dozen or 2 dozen members in the House of Representatives of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. Now it's one of the largest caucuses in Congress. They have tremendous influence. The Biden administration has been promoting. Now, they haven't won in all cases, but they have gotten a hell of a lot of good stuff done. But, like, for example, with Build Back Better, they were betrayed by Manchin and Sinema. But they have gotten some really good stuff done, which wouldn't have happened, in my opinion, if Bernie Sanders hadn't said, okay, I'm going to get inside the Democratic Party. I'm going to run for president twice. And we're going to get our message out. We're going to change this party from within. A friend of mine recently sent me a note saying, I don't get why all your examples are of Reagan bashing the Republicans. You don't mention the corporate Dems. Well, first of all, I do mention the corporate Dems, as I pointed out, at some length and frequently, although not probably as often in my writings over at Hartmann Report as I do on the air. But, it's there. It's very much there. And it's true. Corporate Dems have let us down a lot. I mean, the Affordable Care Act, for example, could have been so much bigger. Now, you could argue that, it was corporate Dems who took it down, specifically Joe Lieberman. And I would not disagree with that, but I would say that, President Obama could have provided stronger leadership, shall we say, in that regard, in the progressive side of it. Or maybe it just wasn't the time, whatever. Or George W. Bush, he pushed through Medicare Advantage, which is a scam, and it's killing Medicare. Within a decade, it will have completely replaced Medicare if the current trend lines continue. And Obama didn't do a thing about it, and neither has Biden so far. So, yeah, there's some problems inside the Democratic Party. Bill Clinton's embrace of Reagan and Bush's neoliberalism, the NAFTA and all that kind of stuff. It's not like the Democrats don't have a few things to answer for. And I write about these in my book, and I talk about them on this program. But the unfortunate truth is that in the United States, there is only one way for us to truly accomplish progressive goals that we have worked and fought for through all these years. And it's the only way that in the past we have accomplished those progressive goals during the administrations of like Franklin Roosevelt and Lyndon Johnson. And that is to get inside and seize control. This is how it works. When they founded this republic, when America was founded, one of the biggest challenges that the founders of our republic identified was the fact that two political parties would emerge, because it was winner take all, first past the post elections. You can have, basically, if somebody gets 50% plus one of the vote, or a majority of the vote, the majority winner, they end up with everything, and the losers end up with nothing. Now, compare that to how it works in many European countries, how it works in France or in Israel or other countries around the world that adopted John Stuart Mill's proposal, which didn't come along until 1861. John Stuart Mill said, let's do it differently. Instead of winner take all, let's say, if one party gets 12% of the vote, they get 12% of the seats in Parliament. So they don't lose everything. So their voice isn't silenced. And the result of that is that you see in most democracies around the world, we're one of only 7 democracies in the world that has this winner-take-all, first-past-the-post kind of system. Again, it wasn't invented in 1787. It was invented in 1861. And all the democracies that came into being after 1861, pretty much all of them have adopted it. But by blocking, what our system does is it keeps out of governance, prevents from participating in governance those third and fourth and fifth and sixth parties. And thus we lose their voices. Thus, and by the way, Madison and Hamilton this is what Hamilton said. In Federalist I, the very first of the letters that they wrote, that they published in the newspapers, mostly in New York, but around the country, back in 1787, this was in October of 1787, Federalist I was published. In order to try to sell the Constitution, he said, ambition, avarice, personal animosity, party opposition, and many other motives not more laudable than these are typical of the intolerant spirit which has at all times characterized political parties. Thomas Paine said, for it is the nature and intention of a constitution to prevent governing by party, by establishing a common principle that shall limit the power and impulse of party, and that says to all parties, thus far shall thou go and no further. Well, it was a nice try, guys. They thought they could change how things work in the United States. But they didn't, they couldn't. There was this fatal flaw. And this is why you have all these stories, and I linked to a couple of them in today's article, about how the Republican Party likes to fund the Greens, and the Democratic Party likes to fund the Libertarians, because they will split the ticket on the other side. We've seen this all over the place. It's, Ralph Nader getting 90,000 votes in Florida the same year that George W. Bush won the White House because he won that state by 537 votes. Now, yes, I agree with Ralph Nader that all 90,000 of those people would not have voted, but I'm guessing more than 537, had he not been on the ballot, but I'm guessing more than 537 of them would have voted had he not been on the ballot, would have voted for Al Gore. So, my entire argument doesn't even turn on that. And I realize that that's still contentious, and there's still people fighting about that. And I frankly don't want to get into that fight. But here's the bottom line. There's no alternative. We're not going to magically elevate the Green Party to some huge status that's going to allow us to allow the Greens to take over America. The simple reality is that at the local level, the Green Party does great work. And we need the Green Party at the local level in many cases. They've got over 300 towns and counties around the United States now have embraced instant runoff voting, which does solve this problem because of activism by the Green Party. But at the federal level, and in statewide elections, typically they just pull votes away from Democrats. So the answer isn't to just blindly say, oh yes, every Democrat is wonderful. No, we have to do everything we can to get rid of corporate Democrats like Kurt Schrader, like Joe Manchin, like Kyrsten Sinema. But we do that at the ballot box, which means that we've got to get inside the Democratic Party. We've got to be participating with the Democratic Party. I'm all in favor of accountability. I'm all in favor of calling out the malefactors. My problem is with people who want to stand on the outside and throw stones without understanding that there are things we can do. You know who's the biggest advocate of this right now? Steve Bannon. Steve friggin' Bannon. On the other side of this break, I'm going to play a clip for you from a 2010 Republican video. And this is what Steve Bannon is saying right now on the radio. He's saying to Republicans all across the country, get inside your local Republican Party, become precinct committee people, take that party over, and we can flip America fascist, essentially. I mean, he's not saying the last part, but that's, in my opinion, that's the subtext. And it's working. It's working. They're taking over the Republican Party, these Trumpies. We, progressives, have to take over the Democratic Party. Okay, I want to play, it's 2 minutes and 1 second. It's a video from the Concord Project, which apparently isn't around anymore. Their website seems to have vanished. But their YouTube videos live on. They've got a whole series of these. This is one of the first that explains how to get inside, in their case, the Republican Party. And like I said, Steve Bannon is now the one who is talking about this almost literally every day on his podcast that millions of Republicans listen to. He's saying the same thing. Democrats need to pay attention to this because the Republican Party and the Democratic Party in this regard work almost identically. Now, it does vary from state and county to state and county, but by and large, these principles are true. This is the spokesperson, I'm sorry I don't know his name, for the Concord Project. This is their Get Out the Vote effort. But this is, when I said get inside the Democratic Party, I'm not just talking about, sending $10 off to the DNC and getting a card that says I'm a Democrat. I'm talking about actually showing up and running for something called a committee precinct member or precinct person, they call, on the Republican Party, they call them men. Here's the clip. This is 2 minutes and it's really worth listening to because he just lays this out for you.
What's the most powerful political office in the world? It is not the President of the United States. It's precinct committeemen. Why? There's three main reasons. First, because precinct committeemen and only precinct committeemen get to elect the leaders of the political parties. If you want to elect the leadership of one of the two major political parties in this country, then you have to become a precinct committeeman. Second, precinct committeemen and only precinct committeemen can vote in internal party elections to endorse candidates in the all-important, traditionally very low turnout primary elections.
This is critical stuff.
If a candidate wants to win the general election, he first has to get onto the general election ballot. To get on the general election ballot, he has to win the primary election. And the best way to win the primary election is to get the endorsement of as many party committees as possible. Precinct committeemen are organized into committees. For example, every county has a party committee. Every state legislative district has a committee. Legislative districts elect the people's representatives to the state legislature. Now, the third reason you want to become a precinct committeeman is because in some states, when a vacancy occurs in a state legislator office, precinct committeemen and only precinct committeemen, not registered voters, get to nominate 3 nominees to fill the vacancy.
This is huge.
The County Board of Supervisors then select the replacement. If, under a system like this, a majority of the precinct committeemen are conservatives, then all 3 nominees will be conservatives and the eventually selected replacement will be a conservative. That's real political power.
Yeah, amen.
Thank you.
That is real political power, and that's my point, is that if we really want to have political power in the United States, we have to get inside the Democratic Party. The alternative is to stand on the outside and throw stones. And that just, that renders us impotent. We've tried that too often for too long. And, we've got to participate in this.